Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM. New Haven is home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make our community tick. Today, we have something different. We have a dispatch from the near future that tells us a lot about what's actually happening and about to happen right now in our world. We're going to take you to the year 2081 to help understand all the forces at play today as our society heads toward a massive conflagration and a contest between forces trying to eliminate democracy. Our guest today is Mattie Lubchansky, the author of a brand new graphic novel that I'm on my third time reading called In the Land of Simplicity. Third time because there's so much in it and it's so interesting. And the best traditions of both graphic novels, as a way of telling a story of something important, both a personal story and what's happening in society, but also because Mattie is one of the writers trying to help us, as so many are now, and you've heard some of them interviewed on this program, try to help us understand what is happening in our world right now and what are the implications. What's it going to look like a few decades from now when this all plays out? Mattie, welcome to Dateline New Haven, and thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
So you grew up around here, you said in Monroe, but you're living now in Queens. Is Queens as fascinating a place, especially for a creative person, as it seems because of not only the density, but how many different parts of the world people come from there? Does that translate into an actual interesting place to live?
Yeah, I mean, I am sort of, at this point in my life, kind of a Queens supremacist. I'm really partial to it. My family, I grew up in Monroe, not too far from New Haven, but my whole family's from the Bronx originally.
Which part?
When I first moved back to the city after college, I ended up here and I fell in love with it. And it's just, it is truly the world's borough. It is like the most, I think the most like diverse county on earth in terms of like languages spoken and number of countries that people are from. So it just feels like a truly, international place to be. And it really, I think it's great for, it's just a very inspiring place to live. Plus, the food is great.
It's so funny. We talk about diversity. What people end up being is they like to eat all the different kinds of food that you get with a lot of people from around the world. So, Matt, your new book is put out by Pantheon, which I actually think maybe it's a little bit of a gutsy move by Pantheon to put something that is this challenging, not only stylistically, but in content, to how we think our country's going and what it means to resist. So, it takes place in 2081. There's a trans scholar named Lucius Pasternak who's assigned to go past the walls of a city. We have a dystopian city, and tell me if I'm right about this, you don't reveal whether it was some kind of nuclear environmental apocalypse, some kind of civil war that led to the military sealing off main cities with walls and then people kind of living outside of them. But democracy's gone, freedom's gone, authoritarian control, techno-authoritarian control has taken place. New York City is walled off, and beyond it, these kind of tribes live, libertarians, back to land people in one kind of lefty cult that is sort of the focus of this. Am I right that is the setting, that's where you wanted to take us in 2081, and why did you choose that setting?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think you said it really well earlier about how, it's just using the trappings of genre fiction to sort of talk about what's going on now. And to me, it's sort of, in the tradition of a lot of other speculative fiction authors, I was trying to draw sort of like, take where we're at now and try to draw a straight line to where we might be going. And, even in this story, even like America, the country has been broken up, right? Like it full on, sort of this like conflagration confederation rather of like secured city states, they're called. And the idea is that it's basically, these like fascist surveillance states, and the walls are there to keep undesirables out and to keep people in, so it was just sort of the idea of the setting to me is sort of what if the things that need to be done don't get done, what is sort of like, what will the world look like at the end of my life,
And there's a combination here of both the political implications of the fights we're having now in our country and that leads to fascism. But it does seem like there's an environmental aspect about it, because you're saying that like you have historical exhibits about rivers that used to exist or communities, right? So is there sort of a specific environmental incident that you're thinking of, or is it just climate change?
I think it's the slow burn of climate change. Like if you get one good look at what Manhattan looks like in the book, and there's a seawall around the whole thing that the water goes right up to. And to me, it's sort of, we're already seeing it happen, right? It's going to be the front lines of the sort of like new fascism that's sort of sweeping the world in almost every country you can imagine right now. And the idea is that like, oh, our X country will be a fortress against climate change and climate refugees specifically. It's already starting to happen. It's going to get worse. So to me, it's more of just like the slow burn of like sea level rise and like crop failure and stuff that's already happening. You know, wildfires, like everything that's getting worse all the time if nothing's done about it. It's the sort of the moneyed interest will just, it's not going to be like, if you are comfortable now, you're not going to suddenly be living in Mad Max. You know, it's going to be people in the global south, people you don't think about already, that are going to suffer first and worst. And sort of like this like sort of metaphysical walling off that's already starting to happen.
So now we've just talked about the background of your novel. We talked about the setting of your novel. But in fact, like all good novels, it's about the journey of an individual, what they decide to do, what action to decide to take after they are changed by a new experience, right? So Lucius Pasternak is this person who is trans, and I guess that's okay in the city-state she lives in, right? Or
it's okay. It's okay as it can be. You know, it's
because there always was that bargain with capitalism that libertinism and libertarianism was okay as long as corporate power wasn't challenged.
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar from now.
and so Lucius is just assigned by the trillionaire, I guess, who controls the walled surveillance city of New York to go document some places, an idyllic commune out in nature that they're about to destroy. Every time you destroy something, you kind of commemorate it in a museum exhibit, or if you're a developer, you name the condos after the nature you destroyed or something. And obviously Lucius is going to be changed by it, and your most obvious parallel in your book is the parable of the sower, along several books by Octavia Butler, which are influential for a lot of us. You know, got me through the pandemic. But those were text novels. Why did you decide to do this as a graphic novel? Is that just what you do because you're an illustrator, or do you think there was something about mining this? And obviously you could never have too many of these books imagining personal stories and dealing with the immediate next step in our future. But what made this ripe for a graphic novel, in your opinion? How did that change how it's told from, let's say, Parable of the Sower?
Yeah, excuse me. That's a great question because as a cartoonist, I'm a cartoonist by trade. I have always worked as a cartoonist, both writing and drawing. And it is actually, I think, a question a lot of us don't ask ourselves when we're embarking on a new project, which is like, why is this a comic? And it's always a question I ask, and I think that comes out of the time I spent as an editor at a nonfiction publication called The Nib for about 10 years. But for me, this is a graphic novel because it has a huge visual element, like the sort of, you talk about the change that Lucius undergoes in the book, and so much of his beginning as a character, like on a character level in this book, is about him and sort of his own relationship to his body and his sexuality, and his own sort of like weird disconnection from it. And so I started the book mostly with him, and the first thing that I had was, in the book, he sort of not suffers, but experiences these like ecstatic visions, right? That are, I'll say erotic, I guess, on the radio. And I sort of started there, and that's such a visual element. Like I think it would have been a lot of work in a prose novel to sort of convey that feeling in a way that felt powerful enough to me.
I agree with that, and there are different kinds of feelings you convey with words and without words in this book, and through picture, not without a picture. So Lucius is sent to an idyllic commune called the Spiritual Association of Peers, and they're sort of back to the land. Unlike the other groups you see out in the wilderness, are just kind of crazy libertarians, some of the people you see in all the novels of that kind of period. This is a place that was formed, I guess, in the 70s by a cult figure, but they're back to the land. They have nightly ritual of kind of mutual rite of letting out, releasing all their violent and sexual urges without restraint. And what was interesting to me, and tell me if you would agree with this. So when you're describing sort of the facts of what's going to happen to society, how there is a walled city, there's a trillionaire behind it, they send you on this mission, they're going to eliminate this nature. You don't get that all right away, but you use words in addition to images to tell that. Partly this is, I believe, about liberation of embracing transsexuality, maybe I'm wrong, and that when you have lovemaking and sex, there's never a word. I actually found that incredibly powerful. I felt like the scenes of sexual, especially later in the book, interaction never have words in them. And then when you're talking about, you have this dream kind of sense of a lamentation that we're never quite sure about this ogre that kind of comes to kill everybody. We don't know if it's real or not. And that kind of has a mix of words and not words. And then you don't show with either words or image how New York City has been taken over at the end of the book by this group. So how did you make those decisions?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, it's always I also come from not just like comics world, but also I was making comic strips for a really long time, like short form work, and the sort of like platonic ideal of a comic strip, it has no words and everything is conveyed via the drawing. So it was always, to me, I'm always trying to reach for that economy of language best I can. And with regards to like the sex and the violence in the book, yeah, there are these like cacophonous scenes of them sort of having this, what's called the mutual rite in the book, where they're like sort of nightly having an orgy that is also a fist fight. And they're very loud, and you can kind of see how loud they are, but I don't have sound effects. I don't have people screaming like shown in like words or anything. And that was really intentional. Because I just want it to be, this book is so much about this one person getting in touch with their own, like on the book is about a zillion things, but on a character level, the book is about this one person sort of coming to terms with his own body. And for me,
is it his own body, or his own body as well as his own place in a society in which freedom is and liberation on a social scale are being played out? The questions of how you do that.
Yeah, like I mean, like his two big like sort of things holding him back are his relationship to his own body and this sort of, it's not, I'm hesitant to call it cowardice because you try not to like write a character with judgment in your mind, but sort of a hesitance. Yeah, a hesitance. A feeling that you need to work from the inside to work on things. The sort
personal liberation tied in with social liberation.
Yeah, and like you can't get like the revolution starts with you and your friends having a meeting, right? That there's those things are so intertwined. Like you can't have a political movement that's not like person focused. You have to talk to your neighbors first. Like that's all so important to me and comes out of like sort of my experience with mutual aid and protest work and all that kind of stuff.
The book is called In the Land of Simplicity, a graphic novel put out by Mattie Lubchansky, published by Pantheon, about where we're going to be in 2081 and what is the main character coming to grips with his own sexuality, his own place in a changed dystopian world. What actions do you take to be liberated? So one theme throughout this book is the melding of trans activism and anarchism. Is that fair? Political anarchism and resistance to oppress, right?
I think that is fair. So
one question I want to pursue with you is when you're imagining in novel form what's going to be happening and what it takes for us as individuals and society to deal with that. Are you a reporter imagining what it'd be like? And to what extent are you an advocate of what you would like people to do? Like, are you telling us, like, obviously you're going to be asked by the authorities, what did you know and when did you know it? You're kind of like, you're showing us like all this kind of top secret stuff. But for instance, I find the cult really interesting because it is started by obviously this kind of white male power tripping guy, right? With a book, with a whole novel, making himself this kind of, cult figure. On the other hand, it is endured. It's a back to the land movement with very high ideals, both about personal liberations and and the mutual right, where you're getting rid of your hang-ups and sexual hang-ups and kind of creating utopia in the land. But also, you kind of have hints in there that it might not always be so groovy. Like there's this comment made in passing that like, we know how to deal with it when somebody doesn't follow the rules, and you kind of wonder, because cults often have their enforcement, and there's a trajectory when you're imagining cults, including in Parable of the Sower, although it was a little more complicated there, where power corrupts in any organization you have. The ideals you believe you had get challenged by outside forces. Were you endorsing this idyllic commune? Were you not endorsing the ideas? Were you suggesting that the idealistic views it had kind of get complicated when power relationships develop? Were you just reporting? What was your role here with this commune?
So, I tried to avoid being too didactic in this book. And you totally
succeeded. I mean, like, this is not a didactic book.
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
The ideas are there for people like us who like feast on dystopian novels or debates about where to go in public and what's the right way to resist, but it's done through the story.
Thank you. Yeah. So like for me, a lot of this was sort of like, I'm kind of down on the idea that like, a single book or a work of art or whatever can like change people's minds or even change the world in a significant way. But I think it is important as a person with sort of an imagination, and I think a visual imagination, to sort of be able to show that there's lots of ways the world can be, and that the choice lies in the hands of like the people, and in terms of being, in terms of being a reporter, in terms of like the way that the cult, I'll put in heavy scare quotes there, works. So to me, it was really inspired not by the movements of the 70s as much as it was me doing a lot of thinking about the, it's like pre-Marxist socialist communes of the late 19th century. In specific, I was thinking about the Shakers and a group, the followers of a French guy called Etienne Cabet, who he wrote a book called Travels in Icaria. That was like a utopian novel that was just him imagining what he thought utopia would be like. And a bunch of mostly like artisans and like middle class people in France got really obsessed with these ideas, and they came to America and they tried to build Icaria in a couple of places. And it didn't work, which is why our garbage currently is not being taken away by, and I quote, dogs of remarkable size and strength. And I was thinking a lot about that and the Shaker specifically, in terms of when you say like, oh, this group endured, because to me, the Shakers were this really, we think we know about them, you're like, oh, they make the chairs and they don't have sex. But they're actually a much more interesting group than that, in that they like, the reason why so much of this book is me thinking about like about separatism as a sort of political avenue, and like, why does separatism exist? Why did all these groups in the late 1800s go off and start forming all these socialist communes?
And also in the 70s and 80s, part of the second wave and after the civil rights moment included separatism. Yes,
and in both instances, and I think I'm trying to speak to it now also because, and this is more specific to, I would say, like the urban trans experience. Like if you are a queer person, if you are a trans person, you know somebody that knows somebody that has gone and started a farm upstate. And that's like, separatism is like sort of roiling again.
Yeah. And can you really get off the grid?
Yeah. I mean,
So when you look at those communes of all the eras, there is always the inevitable, what they say publicly, and a lot of sincerity often, and really inspiring ideas, and also a lot of infighting and stuff that's about other stuff. Like one rap, I remember interviewing Dar Williams. He has a great song about being mad at someone she was involved with in a political group. She walks in having sex with somebody else, and that her idea is that often, yes, people are very sincere in outsider political movements, but there are also power struggles within them that often come down to who's having sex with whom, and that they get overlaid with ideas that started out as central, and sort of the way that, Stalinism was communism, perverted upside down, basically as an excuse for power, and sex relationships involve power. Is that part of what you're getting at here? Or is that part of what happened with this commune?
To me, that's kind of less it. There's less about in this book. So to me, I was sort of, it's got this very like Wicker Man-y sort of setup where there's this outsider who's a little sexually repressed, and he goes to this place that's sort of like a little more sexually freeing. But I didn't. The group in the book is like they don't really have sinister ambitions. They're not. Yeah. They actually are kind of. So what I was saying about the Shakers is that like the main thing holding them back was the sex thing. They actually, because of the sort of tendency towards separatism at the time, because it was like the world was ending for people, like the invention of capitalism as we know it was happening. People's lives were getting turned completely upside down, and there were Shakers that were just there for the 3 square meals a day of food and somewhere to live. They were called bread and butter Shakers. It was like a whole kind of person that lived. And
it's interesting.
Yeah, so to me it was sort of like, well, I could solve that problem if they had sex all the time.
Yeah. But in this story from the beginning, right? So Lucius is going there to check out this place. The first person he meets is Amity Grosjean, who is trans. They're obviously very attracted to each other. And as Lucius goes through an evolution from observer to participant, deciding to make action, it sounds to me in the book like it is that melding of personal and political. Lucius wants to prove himself to Amity that he's part of the group and believes in the cause and wants to be with Amity, right?
Yeah.
And also comes to a different idea about the need to take direct political action and nonviolence. And I'm just wondering, one thing that's so interesting to me is, so your book combines discussion of trans sexual activism or awakening understanding and anarchist political action. And you see in the moment, that's kind of transphobic, obsessed moment right now in America. It's interesting to me that the people on the other side, do meld those together. And I'll tell you where it really hit me recently. I read your book right around the time, the second time I read it, and the reason is because there's so much in it, you want to make sure you didn't miss a lot, because when you're reading a cartoon style book, you're going fast with the story. Donald Trump announced that he was sending troops into D.C. And this had nothing to do with sex. This had to do with immigration. It had to do with, whatever you want to call it, fascism. Political action had to do with crime. When he made the official announcement in the Oval Office and talked to reporters about why he was doing it, he blurted out the sentence that they want everyone to be trans.
Yeah.
And that was such a meaningful, because it was obviously this bizarre aside. So how does that come up in the same comment? Partly because people use sexual repression as a tool and play on fears of sexual otherness to have people then support a political agenda. But I think there was something different. I think that oppressive, because like you made a decision to make transsexuality and anarchism one of the same fight in this, right? In this book. The heroes in this book combine the quest for that kind of liberation on both fronts. The people who symbolize the forces of repression they're up against right now in 2025 are also grouping together quest for trans right and acceptance and resistance to fascist politics. Why are those together?
I mean, I think being trans represents a threat to the hegemony. Like I think it is this sort of thing where it is one of our most rigid things in society is the gender binary, right? And even if you are finding another place in it that is still very binary, as a lot of trans people are, but self included, but like I think the idea of being able to break that or transcend it or work around it is like actually existentially terrifying to these people. I think they are so afraid of you being able to break out of this one really rigid system. It's like, what else? I don't think they're sitting around being like, oh, well, if they're going to escape this one box for them, what's next? They're not like that smart. They are truly reactionary in every sense of the word. Actually,
I think they're very smart. I think the ad they used to win the election when Trump said she's for they, them, I'm for him, or you're playing out people's fears of their own sexual insecurity and the way they've seen the world and where they don't feel safe, to have them talk about that and instead of as a way to sell something completely different. But in this book, I feel like they're not completely different from the perspective of someone who is in favor of sexual liberation and freedom and political liberation and freedom. It kind of gets back to the debates of the 70s of the personal is political. They're tied together, but then you have conservative LGBT people who say they aren't, whether it's, Andrew Sullivan or people who are, gay male participants in the Trump administration are kind of proudly wearing that. So is this book kind of arguing that those forms of liberation have to come together?
Yeah, I mean, let me correct what I was saying. Really, it's like they're smart in that they know how to drive these wedges when they exist. They don't understand why they're feeling it. It's not that sophisticated of a thought, is what I meant. But yeah, I think the struggles are interconnected in the way that every struggle is interconnected. Like this is all, it is self-determination is the thing that is at stake here. And if you are, say, a cis gay person or lesbian that thinks that you can sort of slam the door behind you, that they won't come for you next, that it's not the next thing on the docket, you're, I think, sorely mistaken, and you're being used as a tool in the same way that oppressed people there are always counterexamples of someone that's thinking to themselves, well, they'll leave me alone and I'll be safe. Even if they're not making that calculation cynically, even if they're just doing it because they are scared, or they don't even, it's not even necessarily like a series of thoughts they are having. It's just something they're doing. There's those people have always been there, and I think if you don't understand that it's all, I think for me what it is, it's all trying to see things structurally, right? And it's all one big structure. One could call it a superstructure, could you not? But there's like one big thing here, and you can see it or you can't. And I think for me, I've seen it, and it is, trans liberation is the same thing as body autonomy, which is the same thing as reproductive rights, which is the same thing as everything else that just allows regular people, to live with dignity, with the resources that we all have already. And any division there is superficial.
So when what I consider the climactic moment of the book, which is done so well, again, because it's spare with words. There are words. It's more drawing. So Lucius, the person who came to study this cult is now under attack. It's going to be destroyed by the very people sending Lucius to spy on it, which Lucius didn't realize. And now Lucius is deciding to take a lit torch and kill. And while this is all happening, it's tied in while Lucius is hugging Amity, the trans person Lucius is attracted to and has sex with. It says, "Too long I've been an observer, but no longer. I figured out something tonight. It's not an abstraction. I can be part of that. I should be. Now I must be. Goodbye." So that act of liberation, again, and this happens in a lot of crescendos of dystopian novels or future conquests between good and evil. Lucius decides, and people in this non-violent commune that's now slated for destruction have decided that violent action is needed. Is that part of your call here? Is that part of the call of the book?
Yeah, I mean, so, yeah, again when I was doing all this research on these like separatist communes of both the 1800s and 1900s, so much of it for me is thinking about, or so much of it for them rather, was this idea that you and your friends could go start a farm, start a commune, whatever, build a model kind of new city, and everyone else in society, which they would always call the world, everyone else in society would see what you were doing, and they would be like, "Oh, it's a great way to form society. We'll do that also." And I think, to me, that is a gross misunderstanding of what power is and how it works and how it's always functioned. Like throughout human history, like the army's never just going to put down their guns. And I am personally, I'm a little too old for the violent revolution at this point. But like I don't know. I don't want to have like a capital C call to action in the book, because it is a work of fiction, but it is sort of like, yeah, I think it's important to understand that they're just not going to. Power has never been ceded, like violent power has never been ceded, just because they felt like it. And every time,
so you're giving an analysis of what tends to be the trajectory of people who have been oppressed and decide how to fight back. What I was curious, and maybe it doesn't matter, were you a reporter imagining how this would play out, and eventually the nonviolent people would decide the only option is violence because nonviolence, actually, they're about to be wiped out. Are you advocating that, or are you like that right now people should take violent action against the masked ICE agents and the soldiers coming to the cities? Or are you just being a reporter who's imagining how this is going to play out, looking at human nature and the Shakers and all the other, the Manson family, whatever, like everybody, all the different groups. So are you kind of advocating when even though you're saying one book doesn't change what people do, you're part of a larger discussion as a writer and as an illustrator. You're part of the larger organism of American of human consciousness, where we all contribute to getting those ideas forward. Are you hoping to convince people at all that anarchist response or violence response is a more effective means of taking on the forces that are going to lead us to otherwise what you having us look like in 2081? Or are you really seeing yourself as someone studying human nature, studying social forces, and saying this is how it's going to play out?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's hard to, I come from also like a lot of, I come from a union family, and direct action does get the goods, as they say. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know if, like I'm definitely not going to say whether or not on the radio, whether or not I think people should be taking violent action against.
You mean you're not going to commit a crime and get yourself locked up? Yeah.
Don't post about crimes.
Yeah.
To a lot of people, but like, I think to me it is sort of like if what needs to be done is not done, it's going to have to get done at some point. Like, you can go start a commune with your friends, and maybe it'll be great. Maybe it'll work for 200 years before it falls apart. But that won't stop climate change from ruining your crops, and that's a thing that you can't do by just going off and doing your own thing. I think is maybe like my big actual, like, if there's anything didactic about the book, it's that.
Is that point? Okay, we're talking about In the Land of Simplicity, a new graphic novel put out by Mattie Lubchansky about where we're headed in 2081 and what are we going to do about it and how to be liberated. And it's put out by Pantheon. The last set of questions I wanted to ask you, Mattie, and thanks so much for chatting with us today about your book. I recommend people read it. Is we're left to imagine the ending, which I greatly respect. I think that's a great, and then, without spoiling too much, it's so interesting to me that in the end, this nonviolent commune, which is now threatened with destruction, fights back and wins. So it was, but you didn't really tell us what happened, so I don't feel like I'm giving away the ending. That's all of a sudden the walled, secured city is run by the group that was living out in nature, and everyone who was running that place was banished, and now they're out in nature with all the money and power and having the unfree society, and we don't know what it's like inside. So they're calling it the Coalition of Security City-States, that replaced the fascist surveillance state, and the only people you quote are guards from outside. You say the lefty crazies took over, the whole place upside down, terrorists, a bunch of communist queers in weird robes, and worse is mob rule. I kind of have a hunch that they're not speaking for you. Are you setting us up for a sequel, or you just want to leave that open by showing us the way that all the original plans get complicated if people have different visions of the world? Where are you going with this? What happened?
I sort of wanted to leave it a little open-ended. I didn't want to just tie it in there was a lot of different endings to this book that I wrote. I went, maybe the most iterations I've ever gone through anything, writing something, was the last, 10 pages of this thing. And, I just wanted to sort of I wanted it to be a little hopeful, that maybe, the idea was not necessarily just like the separatists are onto something, right? It is a. I went into the book sort of with a very critical view of this kind of this avenue of political action of separatism, and by the end of it, I ended up a little more sympathetic to it, even though it's not, for me. But I'm committed to the movement back at home. But like but the thing was like the people. I think it's the sort of like sense of community that they developed is really important for something big to happen, and
their moment in history comes, they prevail, which is not the usual storyline. And I guess I thought it was interesting, and I agree with, I respect your choice about leaving it uncertain. Because one thing you wonder is, okay, the guards are just, bigoted, whatever. But the people who are running it now, were they changed by having their fundamental ideas of nonviolence changed in order to get power? They had to take violent action. What happens now when they're in charge? So obviously, like you look at Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas, what happened with him, right? But then you look at Uruguay, where power did not change the leader and their values, humane values. I guess maybe it doesn't matter in a lit-crit kind of way whether Mattie thinks the experience of getting power is going to corrupt the group absolutely, or if you're just saying all sorts of interesting topsy-turvy explosive things are going to continue happening in the ongoing quest for power.
I think for me, it always comes down to, I think a lot about Ursula Le Guin is probably my favorite author. And I think a lot about The Dispossessed, which is my favorite book of hers. And the thing about that book is anarchists, it's sort of like details an anarchist society on the moon, right? And what's important about that book to me always is not always saying, which way of setting up society is best, but what problems do you want to have? Because there's always going to be. And as a society, we can pick. If the problems are going to be, are we grinding people to dust all across the globe and throwing our own people in jail? Or is it a little unclear who owns the towels in your room?
That's
which
interesting.
Problems would you like to have? Because I know the ones that I would like to have.
And what message do you want to hopefully leave readers with? What kind of action do you hope to inspire?
I think if you take away one thing, it's that if you want the world to change, you have to fight for it, whatever that means to you. But you got to do something.
All right. Well, thanks for writing this book. I'm looking forward to my third read of it. Is there a sequel coming?
Thanks for having me. There's not a sequel coming. I'm working on a new book right now, also for Pantheon. That's a little slightly lighter fare, but also, it's got all the me criticisms of capital in it.
All right. The book is In the Land of Simplicity. The author is Mattie Lubchansky. Thanks so much for taking the time out of the Utopia of Queens to talk about the dystopia of 2081.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Harry Droz behind the controls as always, not the patrols. I get some influenced by the book here. Yeah. We're going to take it out with I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the Afro-Semitic Experience from their CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.